Yeah.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the second seminar in the series, Bridging Two Worlds, where we try to bridge the academic and practitioner sides of system dynamics. Today's seminar will be a fascinating discussion with Mohammad Jalali. But before we can begin, I'll quickly introduce Minds, and Fernando will talk a little bit about the System Dynamics Society. So you can go to next slide. So Minds is a student-led peer mentoring organization that's a part of the System Dynamics group here in Bergen, where we mentor the students in the master's program. We facilitate knowledge sharing with other universities within the program itself and any other diverse groups. We also host academic seminars such as this one. We're also in charge of the alumni network so that we can continue to share the knowledge that this group accumulates. If you could go to next slide. As I mentioned, Minds is a part of the System Dynamics group here in Bergen, where they offer a 2-year master program where they will help you develop your modeling, communication, and system skills. So by the end of the 2 years, you'll be a full-fledged system dynamicist. The program is fully in English, and if you are interested, please scan the QR code or check out the link later that will be sent in the chat. I think with that, I will give the floor to Fernando.
Yeah, thank you. And for me, it's a very, very simple message. I'm just inviting you guys again for the conference. And if you don't know, and if you haven't noticed, we sent out an email earlier this morning that submissions are open, so you can submit your work for the conference. And remind you, the conference this year is in Chicago from 23rd of July to 27th of July. And we meet there in person, but you can also join us online. And also, if you intend to learn more about system dynamics and want to develop your system dynamics modeling skills, the summer school is probably one of the best ideas we have. We have an introductory and an intermediate track, so you can sign up already for both of them. And you can go to systemdynamics.org/summer school to have more information. So this is a Q&A session with MJ. So we're going to use Poll Everywhere to get some questions from the audience. And it's no different that you can use the same link or scan this QR code here to send your questions throughout the presentations. I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute to join us in the Poll Everywhere link. I think, Henry, can you put a link in the chat? For people to
join. Do that, yeah.
Here. Why I'll just wait you guys to join us there and just answer the first question we have here, which is, where are you joining us from? We have about 40 people here with us. So we usually have, thank you. If you want to get to this poll here, you have a link in the chat. Just click there. You can answer anonymously, but you can also put your name. So I see some people already there joining us from Belgium, India, Boston. So covering different time zones here. London, a lot of people from Europe today. Kolkata, the Netherlands, Boston. It's quite early. It's even early for MJ. It's early in the morning in the US. So, but we still getting a few people from different time zones here. But thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be collecting questions throughout MJ and Henry's talk. And thank you so much again, MJ, for joining us. And I think I'll give the floor for Edwin again here. Next slide.
Yeah. So the agenda for today is that the first 25 minutes, our moderator, Henry, will ask some prepared questions, after which the floor will open up to your questions. So please submit them through Poll Everywhere. Next slide. So it's finally my honor to introduce you to Mohammad Jalali, who is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. He's also a research affiliate and senior lecturer at MIT Sloan System Dynamics Group. He uses a data science and simulation-based approach in his research. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Business Insider, and many more. He's also a reviewer for the National Science Foundation and associate editor for the System Dynamics Reviews, academic editor for PLOS ONE, and an editor for the Journal on Policy and Complex Systems. He has received a plethora of academic awards, including the Dana Meadows Award in 2015 and the Lupina Young Award the year before. So without much further ado, please put your virtual hands together for MJ.
Thanks, Edwin. Thank you so much. So welcome everyone, welcome MJ. We hope, so for the people that want to ask questions, please send them through the chat. You'll get the link in the chat, and please send them through while I start questioning MJ myself. So we've briefly introduced MJ, but we would like to see how would MJ introduce himself. So MJ, the floor is yours to present yourself.
Well, thank you for the introduction. And I really like to keep the session, casual and friendly. So for that reason, I didn't prepare any slides. I wanted to have a conversation. Feel free to ask any questions at any point of the time. So do you want me to introduce myself again? Because you already introduced.
Yeah, just sort of your perspective on yourself, not sort of, because we only know you through the what we can find online.
Okay. So it's a job interview. Okay. Let's see. If I want to say what is MJ about, I would say it's all about networking and teamwork. I appreciate all the kind words you shared, but I'm not the one who gets credit for any of those, and it all goes to amazing team of researchers and students that we have. And my job is really just put together people from different disciplines and have them working on the same impactful research problem. So for that reason, I'm not the one who gets credit, and just getting into the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary world and bringing people from different domains. I'm very proud of the people that we have in the lab right now. We have social scientists, computer scientists, engineers, people from medical sciences, MDs, who are all working together, building system dynamics models for various population-based health problems. And I think that would be probably, how I would define myself.
Okay, I like the humbleness of it and the giving back to who we work with. Seems very, very nice. To that point, actually, you sort of, maybe we could start by going back to maybe your sort of humble begins, so to speak. That there's probably a younger audience that are listening to us today and that are struggling to find maybe a place, in the work environment and things of that nature. So can you maybe share your experience and reflection on the early stages of your career to get things started?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on today. I'm losing my voice a little bit, so hopefully we can go through the session. Let's see. So talking about career and early stage, I think networking is really critical, and talking to people, getting connected to as many people as possible. If you are building a system dynamics model, there is definitely an interesting, research area that gets out of your comfort zone. And the question is, to what extent are you getting, engaged with, that discipline? To what extent are you inviting people from that discipline and you learn from them? If you just sit down in your office and, work behind your computer and not being connected to that whole, research community, and it goes way beyond just one person. You got to go to their conferences, you got to go to their, classes and learn about their discipline, but most importantly, engage them in your model. So, if you follow that type of work, then you will be able to start a successful career. But if you want to do a solo modeling type of work, and just look for the right opportunity to knock on your door, that's probably not going to happen. And if that happens, I'm not so sure about the success rate in that situation. So I think one thing that is really critical is about willing to invest in building capabilities at early stages of career. And you may be surprised, but it's so amazing to see how very senior professors, full professors, are still investing in learning and building their capabilities. So it's not only about people at early stages, but on the other hand, we see people who are just finishing a master or PhD degree. That's not necessarily the priority for them, and they just want to get to that high pay position as soon as possible. But maybe be a little bit patient at the beginning, and don't necessarily expect that you're gonna get the best job in the world at day one and have the highest income. That's just probably not gonna happen. But if you are willing to invest a little bit of your time and resources in building your capabilities, and that goes way beyond science. Capabilities would include the network that you have, the type of problems that you're looking into, and getting that perspective to look for impactful research problems. Look for not just research. I may mention research more than what I should, because I'm a researcher, but think about the practical side of it as well. What is the actual impact? If you want to become a consultant, what is an actual impactful research problem that matters? So getting there, you got to build your capabilities. You got to learn and keep learning, and otherwise you may not necessarily be successful. I think it's not a new message. It's something that we hear over and over and over, but unfortunately, we often discount it. That's the reason I want to emphasize it, and I mentioned it a few times.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good answer too. Yeah, get people involved and keep on learning is as you said, key messages, but very, very insightful. And maybe to put things more into practice in what you've done, can you walk us in that perspective of learning and getting people involved? Can you take us through one of your projects that you're doing now, or a past project where you had, as you said, a lot of impact and you've managed that? And
yeah, absolutely. So, we have a portfolio of projects. It's not one line of research. At the end of the day, we are modulars and we look for interesting research problems. A lot of the work that we do right now, they are health-related, population-based, complex health problems. One important issue in the United States today is drug misuse, substance use, from painkillers, opioids, to stimulants, and heroin and cocaine and all sorts of drugs that people are using and misusing, and we have overdose crisis in this country. So a couple of years ago, when I was just beginning to learn about the problem, I realized that this is a very complex problem with a lot of moving parts that are all interconnected. And when people talk about the problem, it's very clear that everyone is just thinking locally. And well, not everyone, but the majority of the conversation is just a local perspective. It was very rare to see people talk about the big system and how an optimal local solution may not necessarily solve the problem. And as soon as feedback from other parts of the interconnected system kick back, all of your solutions are going to end up with unintended consequences. So this is something that we all know in system dynamics, but I realized that it's actually the one of the best research problems that we can contribute to. So we started by I think my very first research work in that area was putting together an article talking about how system science can help address this ongoing problem. But of course, I didn't know much about the ongoing problem, so I started to collaborate. This is how I go back to teamwork. I started to look for people, and believe it or not, I just sent random email to random people who knew what they were talking about. And I got connected. Maybe I sent 20 emails, and 12 of them wrote back to me and said, yeah, this is great. Let's work together. I met them in person. We wrote one article. That article has been widely cited, and things got us started. I started to learn more about the problem. I started to hire researchers who were, expert in that area, and we put together a team. We started to write grant applications. We got the first grant, and the research portfolio started from there. And now we have, at this point, 4 large research grants, all focusing, in that area, and we keep growing. We are writing another grant application, hoping to get funded for the next 7 years, because it's not the type of problems that we can solve immediately. So the exploring around and keeping an eye open for that kind of impactful problems. See, like I mentioned, that this is the most, well, let me put it another way. This is #1 healthcare crisis, in simple word, #1 healthcare crisis in the US. Well, people talk about COVID, but COVID is slowly becoming, #2, or maybe sometime soon. It's not in the top 3 anymore. But drug overdose has been #1 problem in this country. So that's the impact that we are talking about. We are talking about, like, there are different estimates, but roughly 100 deaths a day as a result of these, this crisis. So it's about impact, and it's about realizing that this is the perfect setup for system dynamics modeling. And I can keep going, and the question was brief, and it was probably about first part of my answer, but maybe you should ask your second question, and I kind of
keep on going. This is very interesting. I see a lot of nodding in the people that have the video, so it seems like it's an interesting answer. So please keep on going.
Okay. Well, we had something in the title of this session, and that mentioned problem definition. So maybe I can talk a little bit about that and take you through the journey of this project that I mentioned. And that's just one example, but it's an example that I'm very proud of. So when it comes to problem definition, when we started the project, it was very clear that people didn't know what the problem is. It's not like that we as modelers didn't have a clear understanding. When we were talking to different stakeholders who were trying to solve the problem, it was clear that they know broadly that there is an ongoing overdose crisis, but they didn't necessarily know what exactly is the clear research, or problem definition that we need to tackle today. So, hammering down that and, trying to narrow down the super large system, because at those early days, as soon as we were talking about modeling, everybody was pushing us to build a model for the whole system. But as you all know, and you're learning in the system dynamics classes you're taking, we never build models for systems. We always build models for problems. So trying to narrow down and arriving at a clear, research problem, that step took a lot of time. And it was not a one-time job, when I present that project, I have this slide that I show at the very early stage. We had this problem and we had this model boundary, but as soon as we started interviewing people and talking with the client, the research, the federal agency that sponsored us, our understanding of the problem evolved. And over time, we learned that, that initial model boundary was not really sufficient. It was not capturing the most, some of the most important factors. So we started to increase the boundary and we started to revise the research question. I would say probably for maybe over a year, we kept revising the research question. We kept revising the model boundary because, that was quite critical. It was all about talking to different experts, engaging people, and getting into their world of thinking rather than selling them what we thought should be, the right tool to apply. And it was not really about the tool. I think this is really important to mention.
I was about to ask questions about that, actually. As a follow-up question to that, I think for a lot of people, it's maybe, when you get into a project like that, I assume that you work with people that haven't worked with simulation or models or things of that nature. So how do you approach, or how do you explain sort of the work you do with these tools that you just mentioned? How do you sort of, not to say pitch, but how do you get them to be involved in it in the way you want them to be involved in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really, really important to learn their language. You know, if the language is too technical and you feel like you don't quite understand, maybe that's the time that you need to expand your team. Maybe you need to bring on board some colleagues who do understand that language. And you gotta, talk to your client as a team rather than just an individual. So learn their language and get into their way of thinking, so that you understand what they care about and where the problem exists. Of course, people have their own mental models, and those mental models are not necessarily correct, and they may not be systematic in a way that we like. But first step is really getting into their world of thinking, so that you can start to communicate with them effectively. Otherwise, we may present something super interesting, but they don't necessarily care about it, or they don't understand it. But when you close the gap and you start to communicate the same language with them, then you gotta look for the sweet spots where you can intervene. None of these things that I'm saying, is new. We are very fortunate that we are benefiting from a well-established big literature of system dynamics developed over several decades, and there are a lot of recommendations on this very specific question: how to approach your client, how to get them engaged at the beginning, keep them engaged along the way, and make sure they are on board with you. So I would say, read articles. If I have if people are coming to this session to take note and learn about how to do this, I'm just giving you the hint. There is a lot of good articles and books written on this topic in the system dynamics community about this very specific topic. I think one issue that I personally observe, maybe others have different perspective, I think oftentimes we don't necessarily bring into practice what we learn and what we already have. And oftentimes we are just looking for that magic solution. I really don't have any, magic sauce here. All I'm doing is I'm reading and I'm building upon what, other people have already experienced, and, they failed and they shared why they failed, and I'm trying to build up on their work. And I think that's the way that science works. And as long as we do that, we'll definitely be successful in keeping stakeholders engaged and have them along the way.
I like that answer. Maybe to go even, maybe switch it even the other way around, because I assume you've talked of system dynamics with a lot of people, and hey, we talked about sort of the people that not necessarily are aware of simulation or comfortable with, and you gave great tips to sort of engage with these kind of people. Maybe the other way around, people that have used modeling or simulation, but that haven't used a system dynamics tool or model. Specifically, how would you sort of, I don't know, econometrics, or they've used other methods, how would you go towards them to sort of get them engaged, or let them see the power of, or the strengths of system dynamics?
Yeah, this is really tricky, and I want to go back to my previous answer. Again, if you know their language and what they care about, that's really the key here. If you are talking about an epidemiologist who cares about, causal inference, and you're showing a very shaky causal loop diagram that is, up in the air based on shaky evidence, that's not going to be a fun conversation to have. Sometimes, they spend years just to prove one causal relationship. And if you are bringing a big mess, a causal loop diagram with 100 causal relationship, and you want to, have an effective conversation with them, good luck with that. I'm not saying I'm not saying who is right, who is wrong here. It's just very different mindset. What they do is really important, and we should appreciate. What we do is also important, but if these two are very disconnected, then there has to be a problem. So Sometime, on the other hand, people care a lot about communities and having different, perspectives into development of a modular structure. And, if you don't appreciate that and you focus too much on the calibration side of your model, then you're going to lose it. So it really comes down to what they care about and start from there. Because, sometimes in my experience, you got to sacrifice some of the best parts of your model just for the sake of getting those people on board with you. Look for what makes them excited. Maybe that's not necessarily the best thing, in your mind, but that's important to identify and use it as a leverage. Time to time, I see people get very excited as soon as they see a dashboard, because that's attractive. They can make sense of it and they can play with it, and immediately, they see the effect. So they change one parameter and they see the projection over the next 20 years. And as soon as they get excited, I tell them, okay, if you like this, let me tell you what is behind the scene and how we arrive at this. And now they're listening. But if I start the other way around, and I tell them, oh, we do complexity, we do all this sort of cool stuff, that's just not gonna fly. Sometimes I see people, I do machine learning. I'm not against machine learning, but sometimes I see some of the colleagues are just tired of black box modeling, and I use that as my leverage. Okay, I understand you. You don't like to see a black box because you don't really know what's going on in the model. Let me introduce you to something that we developed together, and you understand every single part of the model, and then we use that model for your purpose. So that's what I'm trying to go back to my previous question. That first step, understanding the language, understanding what they care about, and again, kind of putting aside what you care most about and caring more about what they care about, that is really critical at the initial step. And then it's slowly, keeping them engaged and bringing into that setting that you can start to change their mental model and keep them engaged and build the model along the way together.
I like that answer a lot. Thank you so much for those insights. I'm gonna maybe take a step back for a last question, and then we'll go and see what the audience has in mind in terms of questions. My question here was more because you kind of distinguished two sides of the story. One is the modeling side, and then the stakeholder side. And we've entitled this seminar series "Bridging Two Worlds: the Academic and the Practitioner Side." You seem to be really playing in between those two worlds. Do you see it as two worlds, or do you feel like one should work with the other? How do you see it as a symbiosis? How do you perceive that? What are your thoughts on this kind of topic? Kind of a broad question, but take a step.
Kind of a political question too. I like that. Let's see. Are they different worlds? Well, I mean, there are definitely a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I don't want to say that they're very different worlds, but I do want to. Okay, so you ask a political question. Let me answer politically. I do like to acknowledge, appreciate, and learn from those differences. I think that's really important. Again, in my perspective, maybe some of my colleagues have a different view, but in my perspective, academic folks care a bit more about theories and, building their models on prior research, grounding it in the literature. Practitioners, on the other hand, are much better in identifying, getting to the root cause of the problem and identifying what the practical problem is and how they should deliver it into the so what type of question that their clients care most about. Something that we oftentimes as researchers don't do a good job is we publish some interesting, fancy, sexy models that end up answering nothing. But on the other hand, practitioners, may not necessarily do that type of fancy modeling per se, or theory driven, literature based, but it serves a real problem and it answers. So I think both groups can learn from each other. and benefit from each other's capabilities along the way. And at the end of the day, I think it's not really about which side is doing a better job. It's all about do good quality modeling and critically transparent modeling. Again, maybe one of the two groups can learn a bit more from the other when it comes to transparency and keeping the door open, showing every assumption of the model so that the next generation of modelers can build upon and take it to the next stage. But again, at the end of the day, there is a lot to learn from each side. And I've had projects that we had practitioners on board working along the side with researchers. And I think those are my best projects so far in terms of making an impact at the end of the day.
I see. Well, yeah, political answer to a political question, but quite lovely to see your perspective on it, and see that we can definitely work together between those two worlds. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to the audience questions. I'll say it again, but guys, you can always click on the chat. In the chat, there's a link to ask more questions. There's already a couple that came in, so I'll be simply reading them out for you. MJ, the first one that got the most votes is, what are your system dynamics elevator pitch? What would be your pitch in an elevator? Sort of a short.
Well, like I said before, I don't have a secret sauce. I adopt based on who I'm talking with. I don't have one unique answer to that question. It all comes down to who I'm talking with. I definitely have a different answer to that if I'm talking to an engineer or if I'm talking to, a politician. And I do my homework. It's really coming down to that. I don't appear in a meeting having an elevator pitch. I do my homework ahead of time, trying to understand what they care about, how they think about the problem, and starting from there. Sometimes people appreciate, conversation around complexity from a theoretical perspective. Sometimes people appreciate unintended consequences. They don't care about CLDs, but they understand what you mean by unintended consequences. Sometimes, people care a lot about engaging people with different perspectives. Sometimes people care about, good modeling practices that, acknowledge soft variables. So when it comes to sociotechnical problems, perspectives of people matter. Social stigma is a common problem that we are dealing with in many of the models that we build. And that's an area that I often focus on because I know that my client, my colleagues do care about that, and they are tired of seeing models that ignore those soft variables. But see, I do my homework ahead of time to see who I'm talking with, what they care about, and kind of massage my elevator pitch toward that, and go to the meeting with that, preparation.
Okay, what a good tip. We take notes, as always. Next one up. Should system dynamics model necessarily encompass elements we can quantify? Is it possible to use system dynamics as a way to understand deeply socio-urban issues? So kind of two different questions. Maybe the first one a bit more technical. How does it encompass elements that we can't quantify? Can models be used that way?
Well, the answer is for sure yes. Is it possible to use a STI as a way to understand deeply socio-technical, socio-urban issues? Isn't that what we are all already doing? We are using system dynamics as a way to do that. However, let me just pause and step back and clarify one thing, and that is, it's not about system dynamics, it's about the problem. So if you understand the problem and you realize that there is a benefit in system dynamics to address that problem, then the answer is yes. It's not like that we always have this tool that we go around and we look to apply to every single problem out there. There are many problems in the real world, many complex in the real world that system dynamics is not the best choice for. You got to think about it the other way around. You know the problem and you start to see places that you know how to connect with system dynamics that you're already familiar with, and you see how that can serve, that purpose, how that, system dynamics tool, the skill set that you have, the expertise can be used to address the problem. That's how we use it. I think one advantage of system dynamics in socio-technical problems is that, we have this amazing communication vehicle, which is causal loop diagram. It's very intuitive, it's easy to understand, and if you do a good job and don't show a causal loop diagram with 100 variables to freak out your clients, and you do a good job, walk them through step by step, start from one feedback loop and get to the second feedback loop, and immediately show them how the two feedback loops are interacting and creating some trade-off or creating, a competition between the loops that, kind of explains why they see unintended consequences. That's your, winning moment. I think for that reason, in many, many cases, compared to other tools, I see system dynamics has a great advantage just starting off from that qualitative presentation of the system that people can understand rather than just jumping into mathematical equations.
I like that. It really joins to one of the answers that Birgit had made in her seminar, where she was talking, problem is the main focus, and then you start selecting the method, and it shouldn't be the other way around. You shouldn't force it onto a problem. Moving on to the next question. It's a question about the machine learning example you took, and the question goes as this: can you elaborate more on the example about working with people who do machine learning? How do you talk about SD to them? How do you make SD useful to them? Great if you could give a sort of concrete example. That's what the question reads.
Yeah, so this is a bit tricky. I think if you are going to use system dynamics as a predictive tool, because most of machine learning techniques are used for prediction, and if you are taking the same approach, you gotta appreciate some of the limitations that we have in system dynamics, right? So, and you gotta appreciate the capabilities that machine learning have. And instead of getting into sort of differences, try to see how the two can be connected and complement each other. I think one great advantage that we have in system dynamics is bringing on the same page multiple components that are interacting and are creating feedback loops, and focusing on that endogeneity. But that might not necessarily be what machine learning tools care about, and they care much more about learning the patterns of lots and lots of data. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the same thing in system dynamics, but maybe we just we're not interested in it. And if we have data and if we can capture a feedback loop, why not bringing that causal feedback loop and applying machine learning into your analysis, so that you can leverage all that great wealth of data in order to quantify your model. So it's really coming down to if there is a benefit in marrying the two fields together for solving the research problem. And I think one great advantage that system dynamics can have over machine learning is understanding the complexity rather than just prediction. Because with machine learning, we may not necessarily be able to understand the complexity and explain the complexity, but here on this side, we can do that. And this is a really, great advantage that can be added the powerful, prediction, tool that, machine learning researchers are working on. So then what's better than that you can make a good prediction and at the same time you can explain your predictions. I think for that reason, that could be one area. And I often try to do that. But to be honest with you, up to today, we have been mostly in one of the two areas. It's been very, very limited to have one project that has a great system dynamics approach and a great machine learning, all serving the same research problem. In my experience, I haven't done that quite yet, but I'm hoping that there are good examples out there.
Okay, that's quite an answer. Going back to transparency and the strength of the transparency in system dynamics. Another one here, going back a bit to sort of career development, which has been most upvoted question for the moment. How would you describe the job perspective of becoming a system dynamics modeler? That's the question that we have here from the audience.
What do you mean by job perspective?
That's a good question. I assume that it's in the practitioners and academic world. There's no distinction here, so I would assume any kind of job that you would do with sort of modeling skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm trying to understand the question. So job perspective, I would say, well, how about this? I mean, the person who asked the question can probably elaborate a little bit more on that, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good idea.
Go to the next question and we get a bit more description on that.
So could the people let us know who put that question up there? If you guys have it on the chat, you can just open your mic, I think, and speak up. But moving on to the next question. So that
I can actually elaborate on that. I asked the question.
Wonderful.
So I meant like when you are becoming a system dynamics modeler, for example, now I'm looking for an internship, but I don't seem to find like any open position for a system dynamics modeler. So I'm thinking when I graduate, like where should I look for, a position which is related to system dynamics modeling?
That's a great question. Well, there are very, very few jobs called, system dynamics sort of positions. But if you open up and kind of make your search a little bit more flexible and look for more general type of analytical positions, then you start to see some relevant positions. And then the question is, how can you sell your capabilities as the right, fit for that position? If you are on the job market and you have a, like keyword search in one of the job search engines like Google Career, that you're expecting to receive notification of jobs for system dynamics, well, good luck with that. Probably you're not going to get a lot of those. But if you look for modeling, or if you look for the type of other complementary methods that you are familiar with, then you start to see, more opportunities. On the other hand, I would say, instead of, you got to also be very proactive. Being proactive in this domain matters a lot, especially when, there are already not a lot of opportunities, directly, related opportunities. Being proactive and being connected to the community, then you can make a difference by kind of even opening up a position for yourself, So going to conferences, getting connected to people who are active in their type of work, people who are doing work related to your application of interest. If you are working in environmental sciences or in healthcare or in health policy, try to find those people who kind of know a bit about systems thinking to the extent that they can appreciate it, but they don't necessarily know it enough so that they can use it. That is a really good opportunity to sell your capabilities, because they appreciate you, and then they would definitely hire you, because that's exactly the area that they cannot easily find the right person. So it's a tricky job market. I know that, but you gotta have a strategy to deal with this job market. You cannot just take classes and get A's in all of the classes and wait until the point that it comes to the job market and send out your applications. Be proactive, try to figure out what type of companies could potentially, have an opportunity down the road, get connected to people, get connected to, some of the active practitioners in the field. And I'm sure that network will, don't ignore social media. This is something that I would often bring into my answers in multiple different questions. Even for my first answer to problem definition, like what sort of problems we should look at, we should look for when it comes to a new project. Being connected to other people, to people in my area of research, has been super impactful in my own career. I can give you an example of 2 articles that I published in the last 2 years. I got the idea from a tweet. I opened Twitter and I see my colleague is talking about this and it has received a lot of attention and people are discussing it. And I'm like, wait a second, that's something that I can answer. That's a really important question. Why I never thought about it? And 2 of my articles just started from just reading tweets. And the same kind of thing can be applied. And that's how I'm building my career in my line of business. I can imagine the same thing can happen to a consultant, to a practitioner, and being connected will definitely also add more opportunities down the road.
Well, that's quite an answer. I think that was an answer that was awaited by a lot of our students, at least in Bergen. So quite wonderful that you took the time to explain all that. To the next question, quite an interesting one. Do you have any piece of advice on how to go from learning insights that a simulation or causal loop diagram can give to the actual implementation of those learning insights in the real world? So what would be your advices in that perspective? So you already sort of mentioned a few in your projects, but maybe sort of in a broader way.
Well, learning from, I think you gotta look for some of the good examples in the field, like the type of work that colleagues at Climate Interactive, for example, are working on. Some of the exciting work that they try to add to the table, some of the insights driven from causality, from feedback loops, from the quantification, projections, using the simulation tool that they have, and adding that into climate negotiations and changing the conversation toward that. I think learning from those examples would be probably the best starting point. And fortunately, we have plenty of good examples, and the society has been pretty good, especially recently, in sharing them and putting the word out there.
Yeah, that's good advice, looking out there to see what's being done. Another question that we're having here, does system dynamics give more priority to quantitative, measurable behaviors? And is that a good thing?
That's a great question. I don't think that we give more priority to variables that we can quantify. I would say, in fact, this is one of the advantages of system dynamics over other modeling approaches, because in many other approaches, they only work with variables they can quantify. But here, we are willing to take the risk and bringing into models some variables that we don't immediately have a clear way to quantify it. We start off from an assumption and play with it and slowly look for evidence, look for survey data, look for some other qualitative research that try to get close to any sort of quantification. I think I want to go back to my earlier example, social stigma that I mentioned. Think about it. How do you quantify social stigma in your models? If you are building a model for let's say human violence, or I can imagine there all sorts of examples that you can think of that social stigma is there. Or right now let me give you a real example. Right now we are building a model for treatment of addiction, and a lot of people just don't even talk about their addictions because of stigma. So how do you want to ignore it in the first place when we know that's the main barrier of not receiving treatment? And if you want to bring it into your model, how do you want to quantify it? It's tricky, but we can start from a basic assumption. Let's just assume that stigma is a continuum between 0 and 1. When the value is 0, there is absolutely no stigma. And as soon as the stigma, increases 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, there will be less and less initiation of treatment. So it starts from somewhere, and as soon as we bring that into conversation with other stakeholders, with other, subject matter experts, they really appreciate it, that we are capturing the idea, we are trying to quantify it, and you will hopefully somehow find a way to quantify it. It's not like that it's just an ad hoc way of research. There are a lot of research. And this very specific example, there are a lot of ongoing research for quantifying a stigma, and we try to borrow from them. The issue is the way that they quantify is not exactly the way that we understood it in the first place. So we try to adapt and, adjust the way that we model it toward, a bit closer mechanism to what is already available out there so that we can end up quantifying it.
Yeah, that answers, I think, perfectly the question. Thanks for that. Maybe, Lon, want to come back a bit to the answers you gave earlier. The last question here is, did you learn any coding language to promote your skill? I'll extend it. Did you learn any other valuable skills to sort of promote your overall skills of modeling and sort of as a way to sort of get into a career?
Yeah. Like personally,
the question is specifically about coding, but I guess you can extend it to other things.
Yeah, personally, I would say coding for the sake of visualization has been, something that I greatly benefited from. A lot of the time when we build good system dynamics models, the software packages that we work with are not necessarily designed to give you the type of figures that you look for, or even if they're good at visualization, they're just limited to that type of figure that they create. But sometimes in order to, present the finding into, a very practical and simple way, you need to be creative and think about a better visualization approach. And that's the part that I personally spend my own time for coding to create a good figure. And I think figures matter a lot. And we spend a lot of time in the discipline that we want to publish, in the journal that we want to publish. We spend a lot of time figuring out what type of figures people are comfortable with, they used to see. If we can produce something similar, that's where we start from. And sometimes we try to borrow ideas for figures from disciplines and apply them in other disciplines. And that's the time that people get excited, creating one simple figure that shows the story, shows your sensitivity analysis and summarize the insight into one clear presentation is not trivial. It takes a lot of time. And that's something that you definitely need to learn, coding.
Okay,
what program language, it all depends on you and what you're comfortable with. I don't think there is a unique answer for that. Some people prefer R, some people prefer Python. I'm old school. I mean, not old, but I go with MATLAB. That's something that I'm personally more comfortable with, but sometimes I do R. Most people in my lab do R. Again, it's very personal. Whatever you feel comfortable with, as long as you know how to, do a good coding and that, go for it.
Nice. So communication skills, visualization skills to add to the list of things to do. I have, maybe because we're getting close to the end and we don't want to hold people much longer than an hour. It's quite a long talk. We had to sort of to go deeper into things, and that's my interest other people. Could you sort of recommend maybe sort of readings? So it could be books or articles, maybe your top 3 books that you would recommend to go further into the topics that we talked about?
Well, I mean, top 3 books. I mean, people can look around, and I'm sure Bill Gates has better recommendations that I have. This is a common question. Let me just wrap it up with a slightly different answer. If you really want to have one item, I would go with Nelson Repenning's paper from 2000 or 2001. Nobody, ever gets credit for fixing problems that never happened. That's the first article to introduce capability trap. I think it's a masterpiece. It's something that everybody in system dynamics should read it, maybe more than once. It's a very amazing piece of work. Nelson and John published it together. They introduce the dynamics of working smarter versus working harder. It's something that we can all benefit from in our career, in our research, in our modeling, and I know some colleagues are even extending it into some actual policy questions to understand the problem that they're answering. So if you really look for one item, that would be my one item. But instead of looking for one book, I would suggest to sign up for the journals in your field that you are interested in. Sign up for their notifications and be the first person to know what they're publishing today. And that doesn't mean that you should read every single article they publish, but if you are exposed to the extent that you receive emails from them and you know the titles, you gotta take a bit, spend a bit more time than that and open the abstracts and read the abstract. Believe it or not, after some time, you're expanding, your exposure in that area to all sorts of amazing ideas, to the extent that you already have a long list of questions that you can model. You just don't have enough time to do them all. And I think that's a really important, like reading type of work that we all, as modelers, we should do, being aware of what type of creativity other people are doing who are not necessarily doing modeling. And I think there is no better place than just, like in my world of research, Health Affairs is one of the journals that I care about. And I do receive emails from them once a week, and I check what they're publishing this week. I take a quick look at the titles, and I open 2 of them. Of course, I'm not gonna read all the abstracts. I just don't have time for that. But I pick 2 of the titles, I click on them. Even reading the titles alone is quite important. And then I open 2 of them and I read the abstract. And another one is, other than journal articles, read op-eds. If you don't enjoy it, I'm sure op-eds are a lot more fun. If you don't enjoy reading titles and abstracts, op-eds are a lot more fun. So check out what people are putting out there. There are quite a few scientists who care about dissemination of their work beyond just publishing an article. So they write op-eds after they publish an article in a scientific journal. And the idea for an op-ed is to write it in simple language for general public, and kind of getting a little bit being more comfortable in talking about the problem and not being limited to the scientific language that we have to follow what the reviewers are asking us to do, But in an op-ed, you're free. Scientists are free, and they talk about the problem more openly, and they're often short, fun to read, and quite practical.
Quite wonderful. That's also taking notes on all these things. And we reached the 4 well, it's 4 on my time, but I guess 10 on your time. We're getting there. Maybe one last thing, if you want to say anything that you haven't had the time to share with us yet. The floor is yours to summarize it all up. Or
I think that last point that I mentioned, I should have probably talked about it earlier in one of your earlier questions. That dissemination is quite important that we didn't get to talk about. So a couple of years ago, Naveed and I published a piece about PTSD, and after about a month, the paper was out. It didn't receive much attention, immediate attention at early days. And then we were like, let's just put together an op-ed, and we published an op-ed in one of the websites. I think it was theconversation.com that we published that. And just a day later, I was on a phone call with assistant to one of the congressmen who was at that point of time in the committee to design a policy around PTSD. It was the most satisfying moment in my academic life that I saw one article is actually close to making an impact and somebody is listening to it. And we only got there because we published an op-ed. That, assistant to congressman would have never picked up the abstract of that article that we published in a scientific journal. Maybe if they were, doing a good job, maybe, but the likelihood is often very low. And since then, I've been always trying to care about dissemination of impactful work that we do. And that means just, get out of, forget about journal articles. And I mean, of course, we publish journal articles, but forget about living it at that stage, and you gotta spend time and invest in, learning how to effectively communicate and disseminate your findings to people who can make an impact. And if you are an academy, there are places like theconversation.com that you can just start pitching your idea. They assign an editor to you. The whole service is for free. They assign an editor to you. They work with you. And I think that's the best starting point. I remember my editor kept telling me that you use a lot of jargons. Write it for a high school student, write it in simple language, and I was still not there. A lot of iterations. That was a great learning exercise for me. And it started from there. And now we are at a point that when we are publishing an article, when we already know it's gonna make an impact, we care a lot about that dissemination side. We take we actually think about a plan, how to communicate with media, how to prepare. We initiate some, writing for the media, but we also prepare some, easy, intuitive presentation so that once we get a chance to talk with them, we can immediately and effectively communicate the finding in simple words for people who can apply it in the real world. So that dissemination, that last mile is quite essential. And I think that's the area that we all need to work on much more. When it comes to that stage, I know my answer is getting too long. Let me just wrap it up with this point. When it comes to that stage, it's not about system dynamics anymore. I'm only saying this because I know that we in System Dynamics Society are very much attached to this lovely method or way of thinking, or this science, whatever you want to call it. But when it comes to the problem, at that point of dissemination, it's not about system dynamics, it's about the problem. And system dynamics is a great way to solve the problem, but you got to focus on the problem and show how you're solving the problem, but keep your part about system dynamics as just one sentence. I've seen that people talk about system dynamics and there's just one sentence about the problem. You got to change the way and focus on the problem. And that's the good, successful dissemination strategy.
Wow. What for last words? That's quite, as you said, striving for impact will be probably the key word today. MJ, thank you so much for the time you spent with us, for all the wonderful words. It wouldn't have been such a cool event.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for everyone for joining us today. I think we had quite a wonderful time. Well, at least I did on my side, and I hope you did out there too. Thank you again, MJ. Thank you, everyone. We hope that you'll have a wonderful day or evening, whatever time it is for you. And stay tuned for more events. For those who want to learn more about System Dynamics, we'll be doing more events with the society and Minds. So stay tuned on social media and so forth. I guess, Fernando, you want to give a last few words for on the system?
I just want to thank you, Henry, Edwin, and of course MJ for agreeing to do this. I think it's a really great opportunity for people to get to know experts in the field and sharing experiences. I think it's truly a great initiative. Thank you so much. Yeah, keep an eye on your inbox. We have more webinars coming up.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, MJ.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.